Hello, everybody, and welcome to Teachers in the Dungeon. I'm Tom Gross, one of your co-hosts here in the dungeon. Right across from me is Dan Ream.
Yes, manacled back in the dungeon.
Back in the dungeon.
Almost escaped, but...
yeah, it was a good effort.
Rolled a 2.
Oh, jeez.
But anyway.
You know any bonuses in that? Don't you have a dex
There's
bonus?
not a bonus that's going to help it, too. Stuck here for another week. That's all right. Gives us a chance to talk about really cool stuff.
Yes, it is a pretty exciting show we have for you today. But before we get to that, hey, be sure to follow us on social media, on Instagram and Facebook. We are Teachers in the Dungeon. On Twitter or X, however you like to go by it, we're at Dungeon Teachers. Also, if you have something to say that's a little longer than a good comment, drop us an email, teachersinthe.dungeon@gmail.com.
Yes, and if you haven't followed us on the social media, that would be awesome. We're nearing a milestone at Instagram, just a few folks short of 1,000 followers, which is pretty small for a lot, but for us, it's kind of a mountain that's be kind of fun to climb and see where it goes from there.
Every step counts.
Yes.
Well, Dan, we've got quite a show for everybody tonight. We had the opportunity to sit down and visit with the authors of the new book, Lore and Legends.
Yes.
4 authors in the book, and we got to visit with 3 of them, which I thought was a marvelous opportunity.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
The authors, Michael Witwer, Sam Witwer, and Kyle Newman joined us here in the dungeon to talk about this magnificent book that is I don't know, how do you describe it? It's a history of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons.
A pictorial history.
Yes.
I think. Although it's more than that, too. I think it is one of those books that... there probably is a word out there, a genre, but in a way it sort of is a little beyond any single term, I think. But you're right. They retell the story of 5e, and the primary method is by pulling out art that was particularly memorable or was... we only got to see the tiniest fraction of it in the actual published work when it was a much larger piece.
Right.
Things like that. So yeah, it's quite a book. And I found I kind of had to binge it in time for the show, but that almost worked in my favor, I think, because I really just sank in to that book. And I was a little sad when it was done. Just, you felt like they'd done such a nice job of kind of taking you through the story that, like any good story, when it's over, you feel a little bad that there's nothing more to read.
Right. And I have to say, you mentioned the art. There is so much art in there that you look at every day that you just kind of take for granted that this book puts on the spotlight, and it makes you stop and you're like, wow. In particular, the cover of the Sword Coast book, the Sword Coast Adventurers book, I believe is the title, but it's something like that. On the book, it's a great cover, but inside Lore and Legends, I looked twice at that. I said, where do I know that picture from? But man, there's a lot more going on in there than I had noticed before. And so I went and got my actual copy of the book, and I put it next to Lore and Legends. I'm like, yep, that's the same picture, but wow, does it really pop off the pages here in Lore and Legends.
And I appreciated their love of art.
Yes.
It was clear that they soaked it in kind of the way you and I talk about. I mean, I know for you say that I think that's sort of the real treat for you with the D&D book. Yeah.
The other thing that's evident in our conversation is just their knowledge and their passion for this game.
Yes.
It's an unbelievable...
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. I don't even know how to go forward.
It was encouraging to me to hear, and I mean, I like the game regardless, but it's fun to be able to connect with people like that for whom it's more than just a game.
Yeah. So I'm sitting here thinking, this book is out in the stores. And we are entering a holiday season. Man, oh man, if this was under the tree for me, boy, would that be an exciting piece. I'd spend the rest of the day flipping through that book.
Plus, it's heavy, so when you pick up that package, it's something good.
Oh, yes. So. Yeah. Okay, well, I think it's probably time.
Yes.
So here is our interview with Michael Witwer, Sam Witwer, and Kyle Newman, talking about the book Lore and Legends. Joining us in the dungeon today are a few people who know a thing or two about Dungeons and Dragons. They are the experts, as evidenced in their new book, Lore and Legends. It's got a mighty subtitle as well, a visual celebration of the 5th edition of the world's greatest role-playing game. I'd like to welcome to the dungeon Michael Witwer, Kyle Newman, and Sam Witwer. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
It's a wonderful opportunity to talk to 3 people who just know everything about Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, you did Art and Arcana, which is the history, the big, big picture. And by the way, is a mighty book sitting on my library shelf. It looks awesome sitting there. And I can't wait to add this one to my shelf as well. But we wanted to start by asking, our listeners are accustomed to this, but we like to ask, what is your D&D story? How did you get started? What was the first game you played? Who introduced the game to you? Things like that. So I think for this question, we're going to start with Kyle, and then we'll toss it to Sam. And Michael, I'll let you wrap that one up. So Kyle, your D&D story.
So I was exposed to D&D in the very early 80s. I was maybe 5 years old. My older brothers were playing it, and I'd visit them at Boy Scout camp. I was still probably 5 at the time, and they were playing a homebrew version of Dungeons and Dragons that was Indiana Jones using that system. And I just remember all these guys huddled in this tent at night with a little lantern, and there was like 8 people in these tents at summer camp, and I was just in there watching them play. I couldn't play. I was Elliot on the outskirts, but they were playing, and I was just swept up in the energy of it. I would flip through the monster manual, and I learned about drawing and everything from Marvel Comics and Monster Manual. So I was around it early, and I understood the energy of this thing. I wanted to be a part of it, but I never could. I got into it more when I was like, early middle school, 11, 12 years old. Also got into Ninja Turtles, got into the Star Wars role-playing game. That's where I probably played the most of, but I played a little bit of everything. So it was just something that was dangled in front of me by older siblings and older kids I knew in Boy Scouts and stuff. I was playing it, and then I finally got my chance to dabble and then became addicted.
Excellent. Sam?
Well, me and my brother's story kind of happened simultaneous, because that's... You want to help me tell this, Michael?
Well, you start. You tell it better, and then I'll fill in any gaps if there's any gaps to be filled.
Yeah, well, in the neighborhood, some friends of mine were playing D&D with their older brother, and because he was playing D&D, and he was like, I think in junior high, and we were all a bunch of 10-year-olds or 9 or 10-year-olds, something like that. And the first time I ever played, which, none of us were observing any of the rules or, it was such a vague, very shoddy understanding of the rules, which was glorious for young kids, actually, for them just to wing it. And just the concept of telling a story like that and having some influence over how the story went based on what I did was so fascinating to me that I just had to have these books and learn everything I could about this game. And the first time I played was just extraordinary. So then, Michael, I would have dragged you into it. I'd be like, we're playing this, oh no, great. Older brother says we're playing it. I guess we're playing it.
Yeah. And so unlike Kyle, I was Elliot, but my brother insisted that I get involved and be his guinea pig. As he got these books, these 80, I don't even know how you understood those books at your age. You must have been like 10 and I was 7, or you were 8 and I was 5.
Well, but we were young. That was the beauty of it. I don't know that we did understand the books. I mean, when we look at the way that we were playing, you watch Stranger Things, right? And they're like, okay, you're going to roll your spell against, Demogorgon. I want you to roll the thing. And you're just like, that is not how that works or how that worked back then. But that's the point. We kind of made up our own rules. We kind of invented the way we were doing it. I mean, we had hit points and we had sort of character stats, but like everything else was a very vague understanding of what those rules were. And the rules were so chilled out anyway that who's to say we were doing it wrong? I mean, it was, I don't think Gary Gygax would have hovered over us and been like, you're doing it all wrong. I think it would have been like, yeah, that's the idea. That's this 10-year-old and his 7-year-old little brother are kind of doing it right. Why not?
And we jumped right into advanced. We didn't need the original, the basic.
That's
we
right.
Jumped right into the advanced
Only
game.
now are we playing basic, and we're now finally learning the basic. Which we really are. We've been playing Old School Essentials, which is basically 1981 basic D&D Moldvay, and we are astonished at how much we like those rules, because we've been trying everything. And you try 5th edition, you try this, and Star Wars, and every other role-playing game under the sun. I don't know that we ever really played basic D&D. So during the pandemic, we're like, let's try it. And we're all going to be very patient with it. And it's really going to be kind of a bummer of a rule set, but we're going to do it for nostalgia. And then we played it. And we're like, oh, something special here. They may not have, had anything like research or experience to draw from or anything like that, but they hit on a sweet spot with those original editions of the game. There was some really interesting stuff going on there.
And to bring it present, speaking of what they've been doing at Wizards of the last 10 years, it made a lot of sense. You could actually really feel the fingerprints of things like basic Moldvay D&D on the 5th edition rule set. And when they say they played every edition from OD&D, original D&D, to the present, you could feel it. And I remember something that, and I remember seeing Jeremy Crawford talked about, he's of course one of the main game architects, talked about how there's an eccentricity. I don't remember the words he said. Oh no, it's D&D is special because of its idiosyncrasies. The notion that it doesn't always make sense, and there's a weirdness to the rule set, and it's not always what you would design if you were going by the book, whatever that means. But there's something about it, and so even connecting it back to our gaming, experience, is that there's something really special about going back and feeling like the game has a continuity that's now happened over 50 years.
I remember having a conversation with Chris Perkins, and he said, I don't know if this is widely known, but if you were to take Curse of Strahd, for example, and decide for whatever reason that you wanted to play Curse of Strahd with AD&D rules, you can. All of those encounters and the this and the that, blah, blah, just swap out the old monster stats for the new ones, and it'll work. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah. Most of the stuff we're putting out will basically, if you swap out all the stats for whatever edition you're playing, it'll work. I was like, well, that's really cool. Like, and you couldn't have done that if you hadn't been really doing your homework and really research. It means the DNA is there. That's really what that says to me,
Yeah. I remember that part of the book that jumped out at me, the part about employees at Wizards of the Coast. That was their job for a few days, was to go in and play each one of those earlier editions.
Few months.
Thought, man, I was saying, what a sweet job to be on the clock to play D&D.
Totally.
Well, leading into the book itself, Tom would not let me have it until just 2 days ago, so I binged it this weekend. And I had to just kind of surf, but I really was impressed by the way that was a big task. You had to interweave concepts about the art and the artists and the various modules that were put out and all of the third-party products that just blossomed during this time, and the streaming and the video markets and the movie and the products, and so many threads to weave together. So I wanted to know, how did you divide up the workload among the four of you for doing all that?
Sure. I mean, I can take a crack at that. So there's a lot of ground to cover is the reality of the whole thing. Going back to our original methodology from Art and Arcana, and which is really not that different. You had mentioned Art and Arcana earlier when we were talking beforehand, and that was a project we all got together and just had a spectacular time with. We didn't even know what we were really getting into, but we knew we had the love and we knew the story had to be told. For Lore and Legends, we applied the same methodology. I'm not sure how much people realize that, but we applied the exact same methodology about how we built the book. That is to say, we wanted to tell a spine of a story that really followed the brand through from the beginning to the end, and then graft on images that help tell that story. So you could flip through the book left to right, and you could get the notion of what was happening with the story, even if you didn't read a single word. That was kind of our goal, right? And so with regard to the building of it, it was really kind of very much the same. Art and Arcana, my recollection is we literally took a decade. We actually wrote the story of the brand, and then we got back together. We kind of married our stories together, and then we grafted on those images. We did very much the same thing here. There was a little bit more divide and conquer, though, with regard to, there's a lot of call outs and special features in this book, which are kind of very required. Mm-hmm. So consider, we have something called sundry lore, which is when you need to know about this thing, if you've never heard of it, you better understand it here because we're about to talk about it a lot. Here's a good example. We have a sundry lore on actual play. You really need to understand what's going on with actual play around 2015 if you're going to understand the rest of the trajectory of 5th edition. Or we have a special feature called Who is Xanathar? Who is Tasha? Who is Mordenkainen? Who is Acerak? Those are all real modular. And so to answer your original question, how do we divide and conquer? Well, if you really look at the book and the structure of this book, there's a lot of really modular stuff that we can just divide it up. Everyone go off, write it, come back to us. We attach our imagery, we stick it together, and it makes for a pretty cohesive thing if we're all aligned. So that's a short answer, I guess, about how we kind of think about it. But yeah, we've done this a lot. We've worked together a lot now on these various books, and we found a lot of different creative ways to divide and conquer.
Kind of goes like this. So like, we don't like Spelljammer. Kyle, you write about Spelljammer.
That's. I was going to say that's not fair, but that's exactly how that happened. But I like Spelljammer now.
It's fine. I volunteer for it because I liked it. But everyone has this affinity for all of it, and I think the most important thing is, at the core of it, we as people and humans and writers have just tremendous respect for each other. So we always have a think tank. And like if Michael's passionate about an idea or Sam presents an angle to look at something, or Jon is like, we're missing this, we all come together like a team, like a proper team, like a superhero team. Everyone does their thing and we look at it, and we've never had arguments. It's all, there's just constant respect between everybody. It really is. It's like a very organic, effortless thing I really feel like I watch things get elevated every time. You were saying something before, you're like, do you guys learn stuff? Well, I learn stuff every day while I'm doing it. That's one of the beauties is not just write what you know, but write what you want to know, which I always tell people is a better way to write. And so I was not an expert on Dungeons and Dragons when we started this process with Art and Arcana. I loved it and I knew a lot about it, but I wasn't the expert, and that's why, I reached out to Michael first. And I was like, Michael, do you want to do this? Because about the personals. You just wrote this amazing book on Gary Gygax, and you build a team that way. That's like when you're making a movie, you bring in people with vocational expertise to complement and highlight and pronounce the things that need to be done by those people with those skills. And I think we've kind of done that with a nice balance with us. So no matter what task anyone's given, we all then add a little of our own flavor and insight to it to really improve it.
Everyone's got sort of a superpower they bring to it, and it's really kind of cool. It's cool to see that you're surrounded by people who are better at certain things than you are. It's a good place to be.
Well, it certainly comes across as awesome. And Kyle, thank you so much for opening the door to my next question. I appreciate that, because my question is, what is something that you learned about the game in putting together Lore and Legends that you thought needed to be in this book? Kyle, I'll start with you.
One thing, well, here's what it is. Through the process of it, we knew that 5th edition started with a playtest, a pretty robust playtest at a scale no one had really ever done a playtest like that before in gaming. And as the process evolved, we got to the end of the story and they started talking about 1 D&D, and that involved a new type of playtest. And it almost gave us a framework for the book, which was like, it begins with a playtest and it ends, in a sense, with a playtest of where this game is going. And what that rose to the surface was the fact that this is a people's game. And there have been these incredible stewards throughout the years who have brought D&D back to life, and they've been entrusted to live up to Gary and Dave's legacy and bring elements of the game forward. But it was this element that it's all about the people have made the movement. Like, yes, they've put the game back out. Yes, they put out a good rule set, and there are these other things influencing it, like Stranger Things and streaming and all that stuff. But it's because people made this come alive, and that's something we tried to bring forward in it. And it's that Wizards has this acknowledgement that there's a value, it's intrinsic to the game. Like, it's these iterations of the game, and its success is down to the people who play it. It's not like it's a finite piece of entertainment. It's brought to life by the people. And I think that's something we really wanted to do. I don't love the subtitle in the book. I'll just be fully honest. I don't. None of us love it, but you know what? That's the celebration. I do like the fact that it's all these people made it happen. We can talk about all these different, pop culture references and all these great books that have been published, but the people involved have brought it to life and give it 3 dimension. And the little sub note was, Michael brought up those columns that we had, which is the who is, and that is all of those people did come from prior editions. It's not like there's a new character named Zimble Bob or something, and we're going to tell you who he is. All these iconic people in 5th edition came from history. They came from D&D lore. They came from yesteryear. They had their own book lines. Volo and Van Richten, Tasha, all these characters were brought forward in a new way. And so it's all about, even if you're new to this edition, there is history. And that's where we felt activated, where we could step back with our knowledge of the past and say, we can give it a perspective, because all of it is mining the past. And that's what we felt like we were good at. So that was our angle in.
Yeah, there's definitely a very clear trajectory now that we can see it over the 50 years. And, the fact that we had kind of run into this project thinking about the first 45, give or take, really helped. It really helped. And we were wondering, to what degree we could add meaningful context to this edition. And we were delighted to find out, again, as Kyle just suggested, the notion that this edition went to a lot of trouble to mine its 40 plus year history and to bring us these IP characters that people know and love. What a great olive branch to longtime players, or people that had long since left the game, to see a Serac on the Dungeon Master Guide, or to see Xanathar back, or to see whoever. That was meaningful. That was meaningful to a lot of players who had given up on D&D many, many years ago and wanted a way back in, and then only for them to come back and see familiar characters, familiar, call it artistic stylings, and then even familiar rules, or the spirit of familiar rules that they could adapt to and play. So it was a really powerful edition for many reasons, but certainly one of them is that they took the IP they had bought really seriously. They didn't just scrub it all off and say, well, all that old stupid stuff, whatever. They said, no, this stuff is important to people that have been playing this and know it. And frankly, a lot of it's really quite brilliant. And so that was one of the things they did best, I think.
You guys aren't looking at me, are you?
All eyes are on you.
Only if that's okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, what they said. And then to add, I mean, when we started this project, there was no reasonable expectation that D&D was going to be where it is today. None. So it has been fun to be doing this work while this transformation took place. I remember when we first talked about, that we do Art and Arcana starts in the early 70s and kind of ends at modern day, but do you follow that up with a sort of 10-year history on the modern day stuff? And even when we first talked about that, there was a question of how significant is the recent Dungeons and Dragons? And very quickly it became apparent, pretty significant. There was a lot going on and a lot of zeitgeist around Dungeons and Dragons because of what had been done in this 5th edition. So yeah, it all sort of made sense that we keep going and tell that history, But besides which, it's like Star Wars, right? Like some people are like, Clone Wars is my Star Wars. Oh, Episode 4 is my Star Wars. Oh, the prequels are my Star Wars. It's like there are millions of D&D fans, and their D&D is this version of the game. And so, yeah, why not give them the treatment that we gave the previous generations in Art and Arcana? Why not give them that historical retrospective on their version? It's kind of cool.
That resonates. That's kind of how I felt.
Yeah,
paging through the book that you folks created. This is follow-up. I think you've kind of already touched on it, but just to kind of clarify, how do you envision this book's sort of position in the D&D community? What are your hopes for what it accomplishes for all of us devoted players?
I like the fact that if you've touched this game in the past few years, or even if you're just getting into it now, it's a yearbook, a testament to what it's been through, how it got there. Even if you don't get to play as much as you'd like, it's a way to sit down and experience the game and realize how diverse, unique, the worlds are eclectic, the tones, the genres, that this is really an amalgamation of various creatives' imaginations. It's not just like one thing. I'm in the world of Lord of the Rings or Shannara. This is like lots of different people with lots of different backgrounds, different ways of telling stories, different ways of exploring character. It's all coming together into something that is empowering to people. And I like that it collects it all. And I'm proud of the way we curated it. Like most people, I've played most of 5th edition outside of a few things. I really haven't played like the Magic, based campaigns and stuff, but I've played most of the books. And even as a player or DMing them, you still don't see every piece of art. You still don't experience every nook and cranny of an adventure because you're only going through part of it. So DMs and players, you think you've experienced, say, Tomb of Annihilation, but there's more to it. You think you've experienced Saltmarsh, but there's more, and there's a history to where it came from. And nothing out there in the world has put it into that type of lens or point of view. And so this is the first thing I really feel like to do that for something that's like a 10-year phenomenon. We tried to be as contemporary as possible with the information and the assets we were given. Obviously, there's a cutoff point when you have to go to publication, but we were really like, give us more right now, quick. We have room. We're carving out room. We wanted everything up until the day it came out in October. But we couldn't do it. You have to be a few months behind. So I think it's a testament to all these different types of things, just the extreme breadth of it. And even if you think you've experienced 5th edition, there's more. There's more you haven't seen. There's more you haven't touched on. And we wanted it to be that it could sit on your shelf and you go, I love that. Let me go back and look at that. And then you're like, whoa, I didn't know they did this, or I never saw that creature. Like it was trying to be that for people.
And beyond being a retrospective, I think the heartbeat of the book is the question we pose in the introduction, which is, how did this 40-year-old analog brand become a superstar in the digital age, right? That was the question we wanted to. And again, given that we had a clear focus, again, we had talked, that question we had talked quite a lot about, even prior to the pandemic. It was something that was very, very much on our minds. It's like, wow, this is a really wild thing to be happening for this game that is fundamentally kind of a dusty analog game. And there was a lot of questions, especially going into 5th edition. A lot of people will remember this. At the tail end of 4th edition, there was a lot of questions about the future relevance of tabletop role-playing in the face of MMOs, of computer role-playing games, of digital miracles in general. How in the world is tabletop role-playing going to be anything other than this really small niche hobby? It was always going to exist, don't get me wrong. But the notion that game would become the biggest it's ever been by a long shot in a 10-year period is a very unlikely story.
Very unlikely. Very unlikely.
And the thing that I think I like best about this book, from my perspective, is that we were able to go outside the walls of Wizards, because this story we would not have been able to tell the story had we had to stay entirely within the confines of Wizards. All I mean by that is simply this. Yes, brilliant, well-tested rule set, 100%. Yes, brilliant new art and continuity. Yes, great story and leveraging of existing IP. But there's a lot of things that happened that, for example, who could have ever expected that a group of voice actors was going to start a new actual play podcast in March of 2015 called Critical Role? Who saw that coming? They were going to play this great new set that was rolled out. Who would have guessed that Netflix was going to roll out this weird show called Stranger Things? That's this weird 80s idea. These are things that, to tell the whole story, it was very necessary for us to look both inside the walls of WotC and outside to give the whole complete picture. And that is why I think the book is relevant, is that it's not just a product catalog. It's not just let's just keep talking about all the great things that D&D has done, which they've done a lot. Let's talk about what the story was and that how question, which I think is a very interesting question in today's day and age.
Yes.
How did My Little Ponies crossover with D&D changed the trajectory of 5th edition? You know what? It was cool. What it did was things like that. I know I'm extrapolating on this, but things like that showed you the brand durability and just how much they had faith in it as like a corporation, like getting Dicelings and seeing crossovers into, SpongeBob and Rick and Morty and all these things like that. You realize that, okay, this is really having a moment. People are responding to it. And that's where it's outside the walls of Wizards. They're on Big Bang Theory and they've got Kareem Abdul-Jabbar playing. And then you've got David Harbour coming back to play a game after he's on Stranger Things and making it successful, and Jack Black, and you get seeing it like come full circle. And that's just basically validating its pop culture status. And so we had to really cover that. And that was fun, just seeing just how far it permeated our culture.
It's also nice to know how right we were about
Yeah.
everything. Because, it's really weird to watch some of my favorite things ever become these sort of phenomenons. Yeah, there was a time where it's like, well, I'm always going to be that tabletop RPG guy, and it's just going to be this anemic kind of, like I said, dusty thing, and everyone else is going to be into video games and this and that. I like those, but I'm going to be doing this weird thing that no one will understand. No. Now it's this big, huge worldwide thing. I'm the guy who thinks Terry Silver in Karate Kid 3 is kind of one of the best villains in movie history. And I could quote Karate Kid 2 all the way through, but no one feels that way. No one. I'm the only one that feels that way. Me and my friends. And now everyone knows who Terry Silver is and who Chozan is. And I'm just like, is the world were we right about all these things being awesome? And only now the world's like, yeah, Karate Kid 2 is awesome. In fact, here's the characters from that. Here's Kumiko saving Daniel's car business. What? You'll see. It's the future of Karate Kid. What? And then all these young kids are in it. Or Star Wars, for example. I mean, like we were into Star Wars and we never let it go. And then it went away for a while and let it go. And now it's everywhere. So it's so nice to be right. It's one of my favorite things in life is being right. D&D coming to the forefront and dominating and being something that you no longer need to lie about. Hey, well, what's that thing? What are you and your friends doing this weekend? We're going to be probably playing cards or watching the game or something. I don't know. The sports game, not a tabletop. You wouldn't understand, like you wouldn't even bother explaining these things to people because they wouldn't understand what the hell you were doing. Now people were like, oh, it's that thing that people do. So that's cool.
Yeah.
This is absolutely fascinating. I've been really enjoying hearing your perspective outside of the written portion of the book, your sort of reflective part here. This is wonderful. I've got a question here. Your analogy to this being a yearbook is, it really fits well with this. So I feel like 5th edition really made superstars out of some of the creatures and heroes you mentioned. You mentioned several of them, but now they're like household names in D&D, in the D&D culture. So tell me, I'd like each of you to share with me a most significant hero or creature that you got to discover in putting together lore and legends. Sam, I'm going to toss that one to you right away.
That I got to discover, because I don't know that there was ever a situation where I was like, oh, who is this? I don't think that ever really happened. Whenever I flip open the yearbook, I get the biggest kick out of recent versions of stuff that I grew up with, like War Duke, or seeing illustrations of Sirak's tomb, but done in a painting style, and just being like, whoa, young me never thought we'd see that. And funny enough, that painting that they created here for 5th edition, that's what I saw in my head years and years ago, with those very, those wonderful, wonderful black and white illustrations done by, was it Dave Trampier that did them? So yeah, that's the kind of stuff that I loved rediscovering.
Yeah, I think one thing when you get access to the entire art archive, first of all, you find things in there that you're like, what the hell is this? And what's cool about it, like your only clues about what it is, other than asking, say, Richard Witters or one of the concept artists over at Wizards at the time, was the label on the thing. For example, there's we found this rando stuff that there was a were shark that was in the monster manual that never made it. He's there. I mean, he's in the archive. Like, oh, we got to include this guy. But what's really fun is what you come to realize is that there's a lot of pieces of background and incidental art that are used in the book that are used just for texture or corners, or otherwise completely screened over. And so being able to feature some of those was super cool because you're adding some new value, right? One of the big challenges you have when you do a contemporary book like this is rarity is not what you're fighting against. Art and Arcana, we had the ability to bring things to the market no one had seen for 40, 50 years in some cases. So that was special just by itself, to be able to say, here's the original player's handbook without trade dress, without a text bubble, never seen it like this. That was enough. For a book like this, though, people have seen this stuff recently. So then what do you give them to add visual interest and to make it a truly exclusive experience, right? Like a real behind the scenes. So part of it is finding these images that in some cases are masterpieces that got like no page space, that got a little corner that you never saw. Putting those in was really fun to see what the full picture looked like. And then, there was kind of a whole other element of the depth at which they explored some of these characters. So when you talk about things we discovered, right, this is more about maybe re-experiencing what it is to really go in depth on people like Morn Kanan or Volo or Tasha. I mean, these are like iconic, or Acerak, and for him to get a proper sequel, in this case, another proper sequel. He's actually had a lot of sequels. That's I think been the most fun stuff for me, is that characters that we've known and loved, or Strahd, characters that we've known and loved for many, many years, to be able to get new levels of depth and to be kind of resurrected, in Strahd's case, literally kind of resurrected from prior editions, is pretty cool. That was the most fun for me.
There's so many things that have to go in there, though, that there were things by the wayside. I still regret that in none of our books have we featured the extraordinary monster, the Biclops, which is a Cyclops with two eyes. That's a real. I think Kyle was the one who discovered the Biclops. Is that right, Kyle?
I was looking for some terrible, awful, unseen stuff. I think so.
The Biclops is probably one of my, because it's just a guy, which I love.
That's a classic.
Anyway, sorry, Kyle. Go on.
No, thinking about that. There is a book, like there should be a book called Unseen D&D that we should do, which is
we should do that with the cover.
We should do Unseen D&D and we should do Unseen Star Wars. Those are the two books.
Please do.
But listen, so the one of the most important things, like Michael was talking about, the art, seeing it in a new way, a way that you hadn't been privileged. And one of the most important pieces, which kicked off 5th edition, was the starter set. And you realize that piece of art was zoomed in, like it was just all you saw was a dragon's head, and you realize there's this amazing piece of art, which is paying homage to the old, that same point of view as the cover of Art and Arcana, with the red dragon and you're behind the warrior. And we felt this symmetry there. And we really, towards the finish line, pushed for that to become the cover. And it was showcasing a piece of important art from a key product in a way that you had never experienced before. Most people don't even realize that the cover of our book is the starter set.
Yeah.
Because it's so zoomed in, you don't understand it. And that's what this was. It was like, no, this is the product that kicked off this era. That's why it's there. People are like, what is this? You're like, well, that's just the most important piece of art, And I think it's the artists that were, like a lot of the monsters, they get a new light of day. There are some really great new monsters, but for me, it was also the artists, like guys like Kieran Yanner, realizing, okay, I'm looking at all this up. Oh, he did this and he did that. Oh, Greg Rutkowski with his Salt Marsh painting, incredible. Like that's maybe the best piece of 5th edition art. Siddharth Chaturveda, I think I'm saying his name right. Chaturveda. His stuff is fantastic across the board. And then realizing that, oh my God, he had a hand in this and this and this. And I've responded to all those. I didn't realize that was him. So it's like not the monster, but the people who are bringing these worlds and monsters to life that were the superstars. When at the outset, you're like, the artwork, is it all too homogenized? Is it all too think tanked? Are there really stars there? Is there an Errol Otis of this edition? Is there the Trampier? Are there the people with those unique styles? Because they've unified it like they're concepting a movie. And it turned out there was some really unique, wonderful standout artists with their own vision. And we tried to really rise them to the surface and give their art another view that you maybe weren't afforded if you're just quickly flipping through the book, or it was cropped and appropriated in another way. And that's what we tried to do. But yeah, I think the Beholder should have been in the D&D movie.
The Biclops should have been in the D&D movie.
The Biclops, he'll be this. That's the sequel. That's the sequel.
Yeah.
Well,
I will say,
I think you succeeded, because the names you're mentioning, I was seeing those artists again and again, because I was zeroing in on those images. And I've got another question, but we're almost out of time, and I want you guys to have a chance to tell us what else you guys got coming up. So last time, until I know you guys have to get off, but until you hit stop, tell us what is next and what we should be looking for from you guys.
Well, Michael, you want to hold it up? We have coming out November 7th Heroes Feast Flavors of the Multiverse. This is the sequel to our New York Times bestseller, Heroes Feast, which came out in 2020. 3 years later, we're dropping the sequel. It is bigger. It is better. It's just as many recipes. The production design inside. We went to a real castle. It's exquisite photography, beautiful art. It's a planet hopping adventure at its core. So we're taking you to 7 different planets or realms, including Shadowfell, Feywild. You're going into realm space. You're going into, Kryn. You're, of course, starting in the FR. So it activates a whole new slate of recipes and lore. And so we're really excited about it. And also concurrently, this is the month of Heroes Feast. We have the Heroes Feast show is coming to Fast Channel, Freevee. So it's based on the first book. And that is 20 one-hour episodes with celebrity guests from the D&D community coming in to cook the recipes from the cookbook. And Michael, nice. John, and myself are in it. We distribute lore where it's appropriate in all 20 episodes. So that's coming in the next week or two.
Yeah. The cookbook's really fun. It's very in world, and it's think of it as it's another D&D source book, but the stats are the ingredient lists for each dish. So it's a monster manual for food, basically. And there's a story that takes you from place to place as to why you're reading about these particular things,
which is really fun. Yeah, it's not just a cookbook. I mean, if you love D&D, we wanted to make something that was worthy of sitting on the shelf alongside your other course books. So there's stuff in there that's fresh and new and activates your game. And one last thing that's coming. End of this month, certain theaters, Alamo Drafthouse is going to be showing a movie I produced. It's going to be coming to VOD in December. It's called A Disturbance in the Force, How the Star Wars Holiday Special Happened. It's a documentary on the making of the infamous Star Wars Holiday Special, but it's as much about the Holiday Special as it is about a portrait of late 70s television, so you understand what television was like and how Star Wars was plugged into it. And it's got everybody like Seth Green, Weird Al, Patton Oswalt, Paul Scheer, Steve Sansweet, and guys like that from the collecting community, and everyone that worked on the original special. So it's really charming, unpretentious little doc about a slice in Star Wars history that most people don't know a lot about, and that's coming to within a month to VOD. So
that is magnificent. That is magnificent. Well, I know we're up against the wall. We appreciate your time, most definitely, and it's been a pleasure to talk with you about your new books. And so once again, thank you all so much. If we can do one real quick go around, where can people find you and follow you, and any conventions coming up, anything like that? Michael.
Yeah, sure. Michael Witwer. You can find me at Mike Witwer or at Unearthed Arcanist on Instagram, at Mike Witwer on Twitter, if anyone's still there. And again, love working with this team. Love working with 10 Speed. Yeah, again, I hope you check out these new books. They're really, really fun.
I'm at switwer1 on Instagram, and then on Twitter, I'm at Sam Witwer. But boy, that app has become less and less fun, hasn't it? Anyway, weird.
I'm Kyle_Newman at Twitter and Instagram, and always happy to talk D&D, Star Wars, and more. And I did just put out this Taylor Swift video for a re-record of her song "Clean," which I directed. That came out last week. So check that out too if you're a Swiftie.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure having you all in the dungeon. And so, as our listeners know, when it's time to close things up here, it's always time to keep rolling those 20s. Thank you all so much, and we'll talk to you next week. So long, everybody.